All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Office of Professional Services and Human Capital Categories office hours. My name's Alyssa Wong, and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's topic, as you see on a screen, is writing better requirements and performance standards. This office hours is an open forum for federal acquisition professionals to ask their contracting questions and learn various ways to support their professional services acquisition using GSA tools and resources. Before we begin today's session, I'll go over a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, so if you wish to opt out, you may do so at any time. All phone lines will be muted during the presentation. And if you have a question regarding the slides or for Jonathan and Kelly, use the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen to ask your question. And if we run out of time, we'll do our best to respond to the questions following the webinar. And today's presentation was sent out to all registered attendees prior to the event. You should get an email from pshcevents@gsa.gov. If you're unable to locate it, you may send an email to pshcevents@gsa.gov. We'll also be sending a copy of the slides following the webinar. I will also drop the slide deck of today's presentation in the chat box, so you are free to download it and look at it on your own computer. And you'll only be able to download the PowerPoint if you're using the Zoom app, not the online version. And today's webinar will be posted on GSA's PSHC YouTube playlist in about 3 weeks for reference, and you may watch it at any time. And lastly, you'll receive 1.5 CLPs for attending today's webinar, and you'll receive them within 10 business days. You do not need to provide your email address because Zoom has captured that information when you joined. And if you don't receive your CLPs within 10 business days, feel free to reach out to pshcevents@gsa.gov. Finally, a post-event survey will be emailed to everyone on today's call and also when you leave Zoom. So we ask that you take a few minutes of your time to fill it out to improve our office hours. And I am going to turn it over to our wonderful experts today, Jonathan Evans and Kelly Oswald.
Thanks,
Over to
Alyssa.
you. Yeah.
Hey, welcome in everybody from all across the country. We're glad you're here and we're excited to get you into our training session today on writing better requirements and performance standards. Um, if you have attended any of our webinars in the past, maybe understanding performance-based acquisition, either at our previous office hours or at acquisition training for the real world, this is really going to be a continuation of some of the stuff from those presentations. So if you haven't had a chance to see those, you might want to go back and watch it. We're going to kind of gloss over some of the fundamentals of performance-based acquisition and really focus on this particular facet of writing better requirements today. And Kelly, what are we getting into today? What's our agenda look like?
Thank you, Jonathan. And I hope everyone here is having a happy National Plum Pudding Day. So today we do have a few learning objectives. We're going to be talking about the 5 keys to writing better requirements, outcomes versus performance-based. This is something that we've had a lot of questions about. Mission and vision, task areas, high-level objectives, and of course, everyone's favorite, ARC and the ARC spreadsheet. And you can't have an ARC without a performance standard and learning how to build a QUASP.
Yeah, so we're gonna be talking about kind of a layered approach, a phased approach to writing better requirements today. We're going to start at the very foundational level of what it takes to write better requirements. And I think a lot of times folks get caught up in the trap of hey, we got to get this thing put back out on the market. So, you know, you read through this and update it and get it ready and send it to the contracting shop, and then we'll get it out of the market. But Kelly, if you can go back to the 5 keys.
Yeah.
Oh,
Unfortunately, my computer decided to go crazy for a minute.
uh-oh. All right, let me know if you need me to jump in.
I got it.
Okay. So fundamentally, it starts with understanding why you're doing what you're doing. Why are you buying it, and what is it that you're really trying to buy? Not worrying about how. You don't need to worry about how they're going to deliver the stuff to you, how you're going to structure the contract. At the very beginning, you need to go back to the beginning and go, why are we doing this? Why is it important to us? And what is it that we're really trying to get? Those are really fundamental questions. So we'll talk about a few things about that. And then after we've talked about that, we're going to talk about how to frame the scope, which means understanding the scope of your requirements, kind of the highest level of your work breakdown structure, the big buckets of work that you need, and how to build those and how to define those. And then once you have those, structuring your actual performance requirement statements within each of those big buckets of work. So we'll go into some of the tips and tricks for doing that and how to get there. And then we're going to get into, as Kelly mentioned, ARC, which stands for Action Result Context. This is a method for writing requirements. It was first I'm giving credit to Defense Acquisition University for pioneering this in the early 2000s. But it's this format has been around much longer than that. But it's a really tried and true method for writing good requirement statements. So we'll talk about what that is and how to do it. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, really critical to successful performance is establishing performance standards for every requirement. So we'll talk about that as well. So there's a lot to cover, and there's even a little bonus content that we're going to talk about after we get through these 5 steps as well. And we'll wrap it up today by sharing with you some additional resources that could help you out on your requirements writing journey. So let's get right into it, Kelly. Let's jump to the first section here as we talk about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? So can we go to the next slide? Okay. So the first thing that I want to highlight is our whole presentation today is going to be in the context of performance-based acquisition or outcome-based contracting. And here's why. The federal acquisition regulations tell us that we need to, when we're doing a services acquisition, we need to focus on performance-based acquisition. Now, like I said earlier, we have a whole nother webinar that we do on getting into the nuts and bolts of what performance-based acquisition is. So check that out if you want more detail, but I'll give you the key takeaways here. Performance-based acquisition means structuring your services contract around results and outcomes, not how to do the work. And that how can oftentimes be what labor categories to use, how many hours you want from the vendor, specifying that they follow very specific rigid processes, essentially prescribing to the vendor what they need to bring to the table rather than defining the end result. Performance-based acquisition and outcome-based contracting are kind of similar and part of the same continuum model. Outcome-based contracting is really it's not brand new, but it's new in the way that we're starting to talk about it. If any of you have opened up the new FAR companion, there is some language in there around outcome-based contracting, and there's some things in there about co-creating requirements with industry. There are things in there about really focusing on the big mission critical objectives and having your contractor help you work towards achieving these big mission objectives at your agency. So at the end of the day, the first thing we want to identify is what we need, rooted in kind of we are moving toward the goal line, and there is a point at which we will cross the goal line and we will have scored. Then we're going to want to structure things very much about outcome-based contracting, where we're focused on measuring those long-term results, paying for and incentivizing performance that is leading towards that ultimate outcome. And this can be kind of exciting because it really puts the emphasis and the risk on the contractor to show up for us in delivering the outcome, instead of worrying about so much about how it gets done. We don't care about their labor mix or how many hours they're doing. We are focused on, did we get to the goal line? Now, for a lot of you, you go, well, we don't really have a goal line per se. We are constantly doing our day-to-day operations, and our vendors, our contractors, are supporting us with those day-to-day operations. There isn't a finish line. We're not ever done. There may be some small projects that come up along the way, which we might be able to use some outcome-based contracting for. But for the predictable, continuous day-to-day stuff, we go, okay, what can we do to make our approach more performance-based? And that's where we start looking at a lot of the content we're going to talk about today, which is defining your need in terms of results and outcomes and deliverables, rather than how to do the work or which labor category should do the work. So we're going to have that. Outcome-based contracting has got a lot more flexibility. It's a lot more open-ended. It is absolutely not talked about in the FAR, but as most of you probably are aware, the FAR has been revised to remove a lot of non-statutory language. And so even some of the language around performance-based acquisition has moved out of the FAR proper and moved into the FAR companion. So there is some really great guidance. If you have not yet read the FAR companion, highly encourage you to do so. So what is this continuum that we're talking about here? The continuum is moving from highly prescriptive tasks toward, at the far end of the spectrum, very open-ended, broad outcome-based requirements, where there's a clear goal line, but how to get there is not necessarily perfectly defined. Performance-based acquisition is really this maturity model that is in between prescriptive and outcome-based. And so our goal, every time we're doing a services contract, should be to look at our requirements and say, how can we move the needle? How can we move closer to a stronger, more mature performance-based acquisition? And this is why we need to be asking the questions about the what and the why up front. Is there a piece of this that is, in fact, a goal line? Are we going to walk away with a system having been developed? Are we going to walk away with a new process in place? Are we going to walk away with some other big accomplishment at the end of this contract? If so, you want to structure your requirements towards an outcome-based approach. If it's more continuous, ongoing support for your organization, then we want to look at the specific deliverables and results and outcomes that you're getting along the way, and ensure that we're not telling the vendor how to do it, but rather that we need it and our expectations for it. So that's really our continuum model. One of the things that we find really helpful, Kelly, if you could go to the next slide, is for teams to start at the very beginning and go, let's put a vision statement together. So we do this in our facilitated workshops a lot. For those who don't know, my team and I, we run facilitated workshops for acquisition teams. And one of the first things that we do on day one is we do a little debrief on what the team is working towards and what they've tried in the past. And then we go, what is your vision for the future? If you envision yourself 5 years down the road, this contract is ended, and you have been fully successful, what is that vision of the future? And together as a team, contracting, program, subject matter expertise, we have your customers, stakeholders, folks participating in the workshop. Everyone is thinking about, okay, what does success look like at the highest level 5 years from now? And you put together a vision statement. All right. That vision should be the guiding light for everything that you do. And then we ask teams, so if that's your vision, what's your mission for this contract? In other words, what do you want this contract to be? What What do you, who are you doing it for? What are the benefits of doing it? So it really answers four questions: the what, the why, for whom, and the benefit. And that becomes a mission statement. So if you're able to articulate a vision statement and a mission statement for your acquisition, that's going to help everybody. It's going to help you if you're in the program office. Hey, if you're in a program office right now, go to the bottom of your screen, look for the reaction button. It looks like a little heart. Click on the reaction button and just give me a thumbs up or some other emoji if you're in a program office. There you go. Okay, so program offices, doing this vision and mission work is going to help you get clarity amongst yourselves that you are all headed in the same direction, that there's clarity on the end goal that you're working towards. Okay, so now I'm going to ask, if you're in a contracting shop, if you're an 1102 or contract specialist, a KO, contracting officer, give me a reaction button now. Let me see how many of you we got in the room. Okay, quite a few. So when a program office is able to come to you with a clearly articulated vision and mission statement for what they're trying to achieve, that's really going to help you understand at the highest level how to frame your acquisition strategy that you're going to use to support them. So immediately by doing a vision and mission statement, we are starting to build a really strong relationship between the contracting and program office. And you know what's even stronger is when you develop the vision and mission statement together. Okay. Because inevitably there are some things, oftentimes we've got contracting folks that are working right alongside our program folks, or you've got a contracting officer that's been supporting the requirement for many years, so they're very familiar with the program. And they might be able to lend some insights in how to craft that vision statement or that mission statement. Here's what I want to say about them. First, vision and mission statement, they're incredibly useful internally. They're also incredibly useful externally. And we actually encourage teams to communicate their vision and mission for the contract via the performance work statement in the background section or otherwise. It's not contractually binding language. We're not obligating the vendor to achieve our vision or even our mission. We're going to obligate them to perform the requirements that we'll talk about later today, but it provides the highest level of context, more so than often a simple background statement tends to do. So consider for yourselves spending some time putting together a vision statement and a mission statement and folding it into your performance work statement. This is the first layer, foundational building block of writing better requirements. I cannot tell you how many times, and we've facilitated workshops for over 60 teams in the past 6 years. And this process of coming to a consensus on a vision and mission statement has always been tremendously fruitful, especially when it's done with contracting and program folks together working on this collaboratively. It adds clarity, it gets people on the same page, and suddenly it smooths everything out down the road. Great question from Diane in the chat. She says, is FAR 37.6 being changed to outcome-based contracting? If so, when? That's a great question, Diane. So I don't recall specifically the new name for the revision to FAR Part 37. I do know that FAR Part 37 is revised such that performance-based acquisition is now talked about in the rewrite in FAR Part 37.1 instead of 37.6. But whether they changed it from performance-based acquisition to outcome-based contracting, I would have to go back and double check. So I'll do that while Kelly talks about the next foundational building block of writing better requirements. Kelly?
Thank you, Jonathan. We're going to talk a little bit about framing your scope. And we're talking about how to frame your work, because a lot of these task areas are much like building a house. You need to organize the work that's to be done. After all, you wouldn't put up drywall before you put on a roof, would you? So this is about organizing the tasks in a meaningful manner. So in your mind, think of all the tasks written on slips of paper or blocks of wood or even sticky notes on a wall. And then you're having to organize those into piles or into buckets of work. It all depends on how you think about this, because you wouldn't put a plumbing task in a flooring section. But give me a thumbs up if you've ever seen in a PWS something that's out of sync with the rest of the PWS or for that section. We've all seen it. Oh, I forgot something. Let me just shove it in here because it looks good. Well, this is what we're trying to do, is get you to frame your scope so that you can put all the design work in the designs. You can put the flooring work in the flooring section. So this way we can build your house with all the tasks in the correct areas. Now, once you have your tasks kind of organized, such as plumbing, flooring, cabinetry, those buckets, those piles, those sections, those are now your task areas. We can turn those task areas into high-level objectives. This lets everyone kind of know the purpose of the objective, its significance, the impact or benefit, and what you're trying to achieve with this acquisition. We want to make sure that all these task areas, the mission and the vision, kind of come together into something that's aspirational. Try and say that 3 times twice. So it also needs to be measurable and goal oriented. So we're looking at all of these. And when you're doing your high level objectives, you're going to look at your task area and you have your organization. Now, I know in writing a PWS, you may have one broad organization, and under that are several of the smaller orgs that make up the large one. But for here, you can say for plumbing, your task area, GSA seeks, but you need to know, what are you trying to aspire to? What is the potential benefit? Remember, we'll do on this one, we'll put in roofing. So our high-level objective would be for roofing. We'll say GSA because that's where I work. We can say for roofing, GSA is trying to have a roof that offers exceptional longevity, superior fire resistance, and excellent energy efficiency through natural thermal insulation. That could be your high-level objective, because we are aspiring to do all of these things for our statements. Here are a few examples of some that have been developed during our Seesaw workshops. For data analysis and modeling, OAR seeks the highest scientific integrity in its data analysis and modeling to support OAR programs and EPA's mission. That is their high-level objective. They want this acquisition to meet that. And as you can see, we have it for all different types of organizations. And now we're going to turn over define expected results to Jonathan.
All right. So first and foremost, once you understand your vision and your mission, right, you have clarity on your North Star, what direction you're headed, and you've got everybody on the same page. Then you've got your task areas and you've mapped out, okay, to build this house, we're going to have to design it. We're going to have to lay down a foundation, build some walls, frame it in, do all this. And you've got those big buckets of work. You haven't quite got down into the specific tasks yet, but you've got those big buckets of work. The reason that we do the high level objectives is so that not only you, program office, understand its importance, but that importance also carries over into a deeper level of understanding from your contracting folks, and it also carries over into a deeper level of understanding for your prospective offerers. One of the things that I have found in constructing those high level objectives, writing those task areas, 1 or 2 words, a short phrase, those are pretty easy to nail down those buckets of work. Writing the high level objectives is a little bit more challenging, and I see a couple things happen. One, I see teams realize that maybe they have a little bit of redundancy. They have 2 different buckets of work that are almost the same thing. And it's usually because you've got this program office over here that needs this thing, and you've got this other program office that needs almost the same thing, but they call it slightly different things. So they end up with 2 different sections in the PWS. And really, if they just collaborated a little bit, they could probably end up with one section that covered both groups. Other times I've seen as teams work through and go, why do we need this? Why is it important? Why do we care about this particular task area? I start to see things disappear because folks go, you know what, this actually isn't important. We keep asking for all of these reports. We keep asking for them to manage their contract, but like that's just part and parcel for them getting an award. We don't really need all of this stuff. We have access to data showing how they're performing. We don't need those reports. We expect them to perform the rest of the work, so we don't really need a whole contract administration section. So those high-level objectives help us to see where there is scope that we may not need at all. So once you've done that, once you've got your high-level objectives, then we want to start figuring out what are the specific results and outcomes and deliverables that you are looking for within each of those. So Kelly, if you go to the next slide for us. So I'm going to give you a little story time here, and I'm going to talk with you about something that happens in our workshops, and it's pretty fun. So we facilitate workshops with acquisition teams for other agencies and even our own agency. This is a little photo here from U.S. Marshal Service, and we were working with them in Crystal City on a requirement. And as you can see, we're having lots of fun. We got Lego on the table, and people got monitors going, and we got flip charts around the room. So what we'll do is we'll take the high-level objectives that the team establishes, and we'll write those high-level objectives on a flip chart, and then we'll paste those flip charts up around the room on the walls. And we have the teams go from flip chart to flip chart. And under each high-level objective, we ask them to just jot down with bullets specific deliverables, results, outcomes, things that can be inspected. Very specifically, things that can be inspected. We have them write those bullets down underneath each high-level objective. And then we have people going like 2s and 3s, and they just rotate from chart to chart around the room. And once everybody's made it around to all the charts, then you've got this pretty extensive list, bulleted list of results, outcomes, deliverables. And then we can go through those and go, okay, is this an actual deliverable or an actual result, or is this, or do we need to break this down a little bit further? So sometimes people will put a bullet and they'll write a labor category name, like engineer 3. Okay, well, I understand you need an engineer 3 for this particular body of work, but why? What's important about it? What is the engineer 3 going to do for you? And then they start to tell me about some of the specific deliverables that engineer is going to do. So then we write down those deliverables. So again, we're trying to break this down to the what are we going to get out of this? What is this going to result in? What can we inspect to say, yeah, we got it. It was good. We got it on time. You can do this in person. If you have all your folks in an office, you can do this virtually. There's ways that you can leverage. If you're using Microsoft, you can use Microsoft Teams and put together a spreadsheet and just have different tabs on the spreadsheet and title each tab as a high-level objective, and then just have people go through tab by tab. And we've actually got a resource that we'll share with you later today in the workshop that could help you with this as well. The point is, before you start talking about how well you want somebody to do something or how much time you want them to spend or how quickly you need it, just focusing on what are the specific results and outcomes that we're going to need. And then, as we will see in the next section of the training here, you can take these and start to turn them into fully formed requirement statements. All right, so before we move on to the next section, there's a great question that came into the Q&A pod. If you do have questions at any point, please jump over to the Q&A pod and jump them in there. The question is, do we encourage the use of AI for those who are preparing performance-based documents? Okay, so this is a complicated answer. What you've heard from Kelly and I so far today is really a practical approach to doing this yourselves. That is, you are doing all of the work. You're not asking AI to jump in and tell you what it thinks you need. I will come back to this in a second, but you all have the knowledge. You know generally, well, and specifically what you need if you get all the right people in the room. And that's really one of the first steps that you need to take is ensure that you get all the right people. You need the right subject matter experts and stakeholders, contracting program all together to go through this process of identifying your need. Can you then use AI to help frame some of this out? Yes. And in fact, we're absolutely not anti-AI. We're very pro-AI. We're in the process right now of building a kind of lightweight AI assistant that can review requirements documents and provide feedback on how to strengthen up your performance-based requirements and make them more performance-based in nature. It's still very early days, and it's a prototype right now, and hopefully in the not too distant future, that's something that we will be able to share. Could you go to a Chat GPT or Claude or Gemini or any of the others and ask for help in like taking something and reframing it into a performance-based statement? Yes. But for those of you who might be still at the early stages of dabbling with AI, let me tell you something really important. AI speaks with an abundance of confidence that it may or may not have earned. And so if you are not to some degree a subject matter expert that can validate or invalidate the responses you get from AI, it is very possible it will spit something out that sounds really good to you. In fact, there are many times where AI has spit out something that sounded pretty darn good to me until I take a second look and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. No, that's not quite right. So if you have enough expertise to be able to catch those little miscellaneous errors, then I would say, yes, AI is a great tool because it can greatly speed up how quickly you can do things as an expert. If you're new to the field, if you're new to the requirement set, if you're new to this process, there is a high probability that using AI is going to end up being misleading and it could send you down a rabbit hole you don't want to be down. So use with caution. And I say that about the existing commercial tools as well as any non-commercial AI tools that get released to us and told, we can use them. The other thing is, and this is really, really, really important, especially program folks, I need to speak on behalf of all the contracting officers in the room. Do not put any source selection sensitive data that is pre-solicitation requirements. Don't put anything non-public into an AI unless you have an approved source selection sensitive environment, which your agency has explicitly allowed you to use for that purpose. And if you have any questions about that, I highly encourage you to contact your contracting officer and ask them, say, hey, our agency just got this tool. Can we use it for this purpose? And let your CO be your guide and let you know that. I do know that there is kind of a tool that's intended to be released for all of us. It's called USAI. It is FedRAMP authorized, and it is technically designated to receive source selection sensitive information. However, as a former 1102, I would say that, whenever I'm dealing with source selection sensitive information, I always want to know who has had access to that source selection sensitive information, and I want to have NDAs on file for that. And I'm not entirely convinced yet of the governance process for access to the information in terms of who can use it on the back end. So that was way more than I think you were asking for, and certainly outside the scope of our training today. But I think it's well worth answering that question and putting some of those caveats out there. At the end of the day, yes, I think it's a great assistant. It can be a great supplemental tool, but there's nothing that's going to beat the hard labor of sitting down and working with your colleagues on mapping this out. All right, Kelly, let's move on.
Okay, we're going to talk about how to use an ARC statement and turning it into a requirement that works for you. Talk about a few ARC methods and examples. So you're probably asking, if you haven't been to one of our workshops, what is an ARC method? We're going to go back to grade school here. It's pretty much a sentence that is a noun, a verb, and a prepositional phrase, starting with the contractor shall. It's kind of a simplified way. The action is, of course, your nice action verb. And you can always Google action verb list. It will spit out a whole bunch of them for you. The result, that is our noun. It's tangible thing of what do you want? It's your outcome. It's what you're trying to get. It's a worksheet. It's a meeting request, whatever it is. And then context. This is going to be your prepositional phrase, and just it helps clarify what you're doing. So using the ARC method in a performance work statement, it focuses on what outcomes are needed or results are needed, not how to do it. So that way it gives your contractors the freedom to provide innovation. But it also has a defined mission need, which is your context. So it kind of gives you your restraint, as you will, or a constraint. This leads to much better performance. It leads to more competition. It leads to lower costs and a clear evaluation, because you can link your results into measurable standards. It shifts the burden of how to perform and ensures the government pays for results, not just activity. We're not purchasing just a hind end in a chair. These are the components of an ARC statement. Like I said, you're going to have your mandatory language, the contractor shall. Your action for this one is draft. That is your specific verb. Your result is meeting read-aheads. And of course, the desired deliverable or the outcome. And your context, your prepositional phrase, with inputs gathered from key government personnel. The full statement after this would be, the contractor shall draft meeting read-aheads with inputs gathered from key government personnel. If you look, this is a great ARC statement. And every one of your tasks can be written this way.
Hey, Kelly, before we
Yes.
jump into some examples, so I want to just take a quick moment to come circle back to the conversation we were having earlier about performance-based acquisition versus outcome-based contracting. This is really about writing requirements for those ongoing continuous needs of an organization. You're really writing these more specific things about we need read aheads, we need meeting coordination, we need slide decks delivered, we need minutes from meetings, like those specific deliverables that you're asking vendors for. Those are things that we, instead of just saying, hey, give us an administrative clerk level 4, we talk about the actual results and outcomes that we're looking for. We don't want to just say assists with providing meeting coordination. We want to talk about what does that really look like? What are some of the practical things? And that's what this ARC statement does. It showcases some of the specific results and deliverables versus outcome-based contracting, where this might be too in the weeds for an outcome-based contract. For an outcome-based contract, we're probably thinking we can use some of the same structure, some of the same format, but the result is going to be much beefier, and it's going to be something more significant, and it's probably going to have a lot of kind of milestones and subcomponents to it that we're achieving along the way. So just wanted to clarify that as you're looking at outcome-based contracting versus performance-based acquisition. If you currently have a contract structured around labor categories, and your agency is trying to transition away from time and material labor hour to more firm fixed price, which does seem to be the flavor of the day, then to do that, you need to look at what are you getting from those labor categories? What are the results, the outcomes, deliverables? Similar to what I described earlier, looking at task area by task area. And the outcome here is going to be that you'll end up with quite a few of these ARC statements that will form the basis of your performance work statement. All right. Thanks for letting me clarify that. Back to you, Kelly.
Not a problem. Here's an example, and the original statement on this is the contractor shall train system end users on how to use the system. I don't know about you, but I've written a statement like this in the past. But if we start breaking it down, the contractor shall, that is our mandatory language. Train is our action verb. And on how to use the system is our prepositional phrase. So that leaves end users, system end users, as our noun. So it doesn't really quite fit. So we're going to have to kind of change it around. What is the purpose of what you're trying to do? And so the revised statement is they shall provide training to end users on how to use the system. And then, of course, you could also put the contractor shall deliver a user manual. That allows for the noun, the action verb, and the context of the prepositional phrase. This can be a little difficult at first. I struggled. It was a little bit, and then the light bulb went off over my head, and it was like, oh, I get it. Now I don't think I would do it any other way.
And Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but with an example like that, it's so simple. At the end of the day, if that ended up in your performance work statement, you'd probably get what you were asking for. You'd end up with the training. But this illustrates a bigger point, right? That even with, as you get more and more complicated in what your need is, what your results are, this framework becomes that much more important. Is that right?
I believe it also helps with knowing. You might have to work with your contractor and your contracting officer to determine what type of training, what they need to deliver, because it's not specifically stated also.
Yeah, and
Here's another.
that additional
Yes.
context becomes really important as you're writing your requirement statements, so that one thing that our vendors, our industry partners are constantly telling us is, hey, government, please be more transparent. Just say what you mean. Tell us what you need, say what you mean. What's the problem? How do you want me to show up? What's the end result you're looking for? Be transparent about it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our bonus section, but context is our friend in that regard. But it's really important that we get that bottom line up front. The contractor shall do something. Contractor shall deliver something, right? Get the bottom line up front and then have an appropriate level of context afterwards for them to understand what it is that you're looking for.
Thank you, Jonathan. For this ARC example, the contractor shall be required to create or implement approaches to gather internal or external agency data through data collection, surveys, or questionnaires. Sometimes, but not always, if you see two verbs, start looking a little closer. Sometimes it means you have more than one item within your statement. Here you're required to create, but also implement. You also need to look through, okay, data collection, surveys, questionnaires. Those are all different requirements. They are all going to have different types of data needed for them. The revised statement, the contractor shall create data collection methodologies for internal or external agencies for data used in support of agency projects and programs. What that does is we went to one verb, create. And this can be very important in the next few slides when I start talking to you about our handy dandy ARC spreadsheet.
And Kelly, if we can go back to that one real quick, I want to give
Sure.
folks a little bit of background. This is maybe one argument for why you can't just rely on AI alone. If I were to feed AI the original statement and have it and say, spit back out something that is better written in performance-based acquisition, it's probably going to end up with some great sounding rewrite. And as Kelly said, it might break it into two different requirements, one for creation, one for implementation. The revised statement that you're seeing here is a revised statement by the actual acquisition team that had the original statement. And it came as a result of discussions amongst the team about what they really needed and what they were looking for. So yes, there was creating and implementing approaches, but at the end of the day, when we dug into that, what they really needed, what they were most desirous of their industry partner to provide was a data collection methodology, which they could validate, they could approve and say, yes, that is a great data collection methodology. We approve that. And then they were going to have another requirement for the vendor to execute on the approved data collection methodology. And to actually pull data, feed it into this, do that with it. Like there was a series of other requirements that followed. So that's not something that AI could have intuited because AI doesn't have intuition. AI also couldn't have known the specific needs of the agency. So yes, to using AI to help you do some wordsmithing and getting some language that is more plain language and easier to digest. But you cannot cut out the critical thinking. And so that's really important. And I just want to throw that out there as we continue on. Thanks, Kelly.
And also, all of these examples came from a workshop. These are all real statements. So on this one, assistance shall be provided for the conduct of logistical support meetings. One, we don't have our mandatory language of the contractor shall. And assistance is a little vague. What type of assistance? So we need to look and kind of rewrite using our action words, using our nouns, using our context. And what this ended up being was the organization ended up with 3 different requirements just from that one original statement. And as you can see, it now has the contractor shall, it has our action verb, it has our noun for what we want to get, and then it also has all of the context on there. That is what we facilitate, and we dig a little deeper, and we help teams dig a little deeper. And to assist everybody, the Center of Excellence has created a spreadsheet. We provided this because first column, the contractor shall, that stays. We have an action. So it is asking your teams, what action do you want? What is your action verb? And then it has to look at what is your result going to be? And you can type in your context. And what you can't see from this picture is it will create your entire sentence on the column that's to the right of notes for arc statement. And this helps set up every single one of your requirements. One thing that we do have to wordsmith is occasionally the results are a paragraph when it should be a much smaller list. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan on performance standards that come exactly after you have your requirements written.
Thanks, Kelly. So we're definitely going to share out a link to the worksheet that Kelly just shared, and it's got some other stuff in it too. If you want to follow along at home, let me just do this real quick. I will type into the chat gsa.gov/CSAW. If you can't copy and paste chat, or if chat links aren't working for you, you can just type gsa.gov/CSAW into your browser window and head to our page. About middle of the page, you'll find a little how-to on using the ARC worksheet. It's a great tool. It's highly effective. And as Kelly said, once you have your requirements, you need to establish performance standards. And performance standards are critical. And I honestly believe that this is maybe the biggest pitfall across government is when it comes to performance standards. This includes, we don't have any. Now that's a problem, because then you have nothing to hold the vendor accountable to. You say, well, okay, we're doing a time and material labor hour contract, and we want these key personnel and we want these labor categories, and then we have a requirements section that's got all this stuff in it. Okay, at the end of the day, your contract is buying those bodies for the number of hours that you've established, and they're going to invoice you for the number of hours worked for those labor categories. And holding them accountable for work, I mean, if you have performance standards, that can be helpful to guide the conversation, but it's a best effort contract because it's time and material labor hour. So you're going to get what you get. And that can be really challenging, which is why there's a big push towards moving contracts to firm fixed price, which, don't get me wrong, I fully understand that there's some challenges to firm fixed price. Especially when it comes to dynamic, evolving environments where we don't always need and we can't predict things, too terribly far in the future, as evidenced by the last year of federal service. But this course, let me edit myself here. This course is not designed to get into all the intricacies of acquisition strategy. So I will suffice to say, it is always a good idea to establish performance standards for your requirements. And sometimes this shows up as something called service level agreements. I don't have any particular beef with that, except that the federal acquisition regulations don't mention service level agreements anywhere. They do talk about performance standards, and service level agreements are essentially a form of performance standard. However, when you write service level agreements, there tends to be a small handful of service level agreements that are governing the performance of the entire contract. When we talk about performance standards, we literally mean to have a performance standard for every single task. Kelly, can you hit the next slide, please? When we think about performance-based acquisition and what makes it work, we truly authentically believe that you cannot have a requirement without an accompanying standard. It doesn't make sense. It's incomplete. You say, we want you to deliver this, but we have not yet expressed to you our expectation for that delivery. What is the quality of it? So there was a question asked in the Q&A pod, if anyone's following along at home, from Mike. He asked, or pointed out that when we showed the example of meeting read ahead, he said it's unclear what a read ahead is. And that's a totally valid question, to which I responded, I think the agency that had that requirement had an additional context bullet that explained some of the expected elements of read aheads. They might have said something along the lines of, historically, read aheads have included, and then listed a few things that are in there. But we would want to go a step further and go, okay, so presuming we understand what a read ahead is, what is our expectation of the quality of those read aheads? What we typically see for agencies that are using performance standards is that there's some sort of timeliness standard where they say, okay, read aheads must be submitted to the core 1 week prior to the meeting, or 48 hours prior to the meeting, or there's some time-bound expectation. Okay, so then the government gets them 48 hours ahead of the meeting. And then it's like, okay, well, this isn't good. Now what? Well, typically we go back to the vendor and say, we don't find this to be good, redo it. And so then they're spending their time redoing it. And even if our contracting officer puts some sort of language in the contract that says that if it doesn't meet the government's expectations of quality, that they'll do the work, without charging us any additional money, that's all well and good, but then those individuals that are performing work are tied up doing rework instead of doing new work. And so things start to get lag behind, hours get used up, and suddenly we find ourselves in a pickle. So better to focus on quality and express to our industry partners our expectation of quality, because timeliness is easy. You can throw that on everything. But writing a standard for quality is really important. So Kelly, let's go to the next slide and talk about that. Writing a quality performance standard is not easy. And the reason it's not easy, and one of the reasons why most people avoid it, is because they go, oh, that's starting to sound subjective. That could be interpreted multiple ways. And there's truth to that. That's absolutely true. So our goal with writing a quality performance standard is not to get to a place of pure objective measurability. That would be ideal, and we should move as close to that as possible. We should be as objective as we possibly can in our expectations of quality. And when it comes to services, unfortunately, we're not dealing with widgets. I can't say that out of 1,000 widgets, only 10 of them can be defective. That's really great for widget production, but that doesn't really work all that well with services delivery. So I have to put more than just, 1% unacceptable is okay. I have to actually articulate, what is something that's wrong. And so this technique here that you're seeing on the slide, this is a technique where you look at what is the deliverable and you go, what would it look like if that was unacceptable? If it was just absolutely rotten, we don't like it at all, it's terrible. What would be some of the qualities of that terribleness? And we map that out. We write plain language. What would it look like to be unacceptable? And then we flip the script and write the inverse. Okay, so if it's incomplete, we want it to be complete. Question is, well, what does complete mean? We'll come back to that. We want it to, it's poorly written. We want it to be clear, concise, well-structured documentation. Who gets to decide if it's clear, concise, and well-structured documentation, right? So there's a subjective component, but let's be real, folks, okay? Lean in real close. I'm going to tell you something. It's the secret of life. Not everything in life is purely objectively measurable. There is a subjectivity to life. It's just a reality. Okay, so we need to articulate to the best of our ability what our expectation is in as plain language as possible. Okay, and I know that that's challenging, and it might make you uncomfortable. It might make your contracting officer uncomfortable. But I'm going to give you a couple more insights onto this. Once you have developed your performance standards, you're going to establish an acceptable quality level, which is essentially, if you can't deliver perfection, what is the next level of acceptability I'm willing to tolerate, right? So if you can't give me 1,000 widgets that are perfect, give me at least 99% of the widgets perfectly. Okay, so that gives a little bit of an error rate, 1% error rate on the widgets. But again, that's really difficult with services. But we need to define the standard as perfection. We need to define the acceptable quality level as our tolerance for something other than perfection. And then what we can do, once we have our requirements and all of our standards written and drafted, we take them out to industry and we do an actual exciting, informative bit of market research, and we share them with industry and say, hey, do these make sense? Are these performance standards that you would be willing to adhere to? Are there things that you would change about them? Where are the bits of ambiguity? How would you tighten it up? And we get industry to help co-create our performance standards based on their experience, based on what they're willing to tolerate on their end in terms of accepting risk. Okay, so socialize them with industry. That's huge. I mean, that should be an absolute given built into your process all the time, every time. Industry feedback is critical because we do need a reality check of whether our industry partners are willing to show up based on how we've written things. So try out this tip for writing performance standards for quality. Leverage commercial standards to the maximum extent practicable. So spend some time doing some market research. Are there existing industry standards for things like this? I think you will find that there is and there isn't available information on what is truly an industry standard. There are some, like ISO 9000 has some pretty robust standards for that field of work. But do your homework, do your research, and that'll help a lot. Yeah, Daniel, he said, finally speaking clearly about how to achieve standards in AQS. It's not easy. I'm not claiming that this training today is going to make this easier. Hopefully this helps ease the burden and gives you a little bit of a path forward, but this takes a lot of critical thinking. And this is why we highly encourage you to get together and collaborate, contracting and program office together, so that your contracting folks, these folks are so well trained. They are there to cover your back and their own. So they're really going to help you look for those things that might bring about risk. Program offices, you guys understand the need better than anyone. And you also understand your industry. And so you're going to have a better take on what industry might be willing to tolerate and step into. So, yeah, we do. We have Sunmarie. Good catch there, Helen. Thank you. So this is a lot of hard work. It happens on your team. It also happens with effective market research. So the ARC spreadsheet, kind of circling back to this, Kelly was showcasing this earlier about how to put your different components of the action result context in there. This spreadsheet also has additional columns that walk you through writing down your performance standard, your acceptable quality level, what is to be inspected, your frequency of inspection, and who is going to do the inspection. Your quality assurance surveillance plan is everything that you see in the right-hand column there. Your standard, or not actually, let me take that back. Sorry. Your quality assurance surveillance plan is focused on what you're inspecting, your frequency of inspection, and who's doing the inspection. Your requirement statement, your task, your ARC statement, your performance standard, and your AQL, those three things, requirement, standard, AQL, those three things should be in your PWS. The QASP just references them. The QASP is not the place where you put your standards and AQLs for the first time. If you're putting your standards and your AQLs in the QASP for the first time, that's the only document in your contract documents that's got it, then you have to incorporate the QASP into your contract, and we do not want to do that. The QASP should be a standalone document. All right. It is a tool for you, is a tool for the government. It defines how we are going to monitor performance. It can be helpful to communicate to industry our plan, our process, how we're going to monitor. But we can make changes to that plan whenever we need to, as long as it's not incorporated into the contract. So if you have any questions about that, I would be happy to answer, jump into the Q&A and drop your question there. Monique asks, are service level agreements different than QASP, or do you consider them the same? I consider them different. Your service level agreements are akin to performance standards and acceptable quality levels, and those should be in your performance work statement. Your QASP, again, is focused on what are you going to inspect, how frequently are you going to inspect it, and who's doing the inspection. It's essentially a government project plan for monitoring performance. It should not be a contract document to outline what the standards are. We can reference the standards in the contract, but we are not establishing the standards in the QASP. You got it. Great question. Joseph asked a question, would it be appropriate to ask a vendor to define the specific outcomes or results of a task during contract price negotiations? For example, ask them to tell you what the engineer 3 will produce. Ooh, Joseph, that is a layered question, my friend. There is a lot to that. The short answer is, and you're going to hate this, you're just going to absolutely hate this, especially if you're a program guy, it depends. The longer answer is, I'm not sure that contract price negotiations is the best time to try and start understanding the performance outcomes and results that we're asking for from a particular labor category. If you're, I don't know exactly what you would be negotiating. So again, it gets complicated just in terms of how you've asked the question. It's creative, I'll give you that. And there may be something interesting to that. So I'm going to ponder on that. I'm going to marinate on that a little bit. But that's super complicated. Raj says, we still have to share the cost with the contractor. So when do we share it? So Raj, I mean, technically speaking, you don't have to. I mean, if it's agency policy that you share it, you do. And I'll be the first to say, I highly recommend that you do share the QASP with the contractor. But again, it's our document, not theirs. Our QASP, we can modify it to adjust to what we see in their quality control plan. And if we want to adjust our monitoring based on what they are doing on their end, that's cool. But they should not be adjusting their quality control process based on our quality assurance process. So when do we share the QASP with them? I'm a pretty big advocate for share a draft during the solicitation. I mean, share a draft pre-solicitation during market research and let them provide feedback. But you can also share it when you post the solicitation, making sure that you clearly identify that it will not become part of the contract. And then as you're executing, as you're performing on the contract, if you make changes to the QASP, eventually you'll want to share that with the vendor. But you may not wish to share those changes with them immediately. For example, if you're having a problem with performance and you adjust from a random sample to a 100% inspection, you don't necessarily need to tell them immediately. You can just start inspecting at 100%. And then you can have a conversation with them and be like, hey, we pivoted to 100% because we started to notice some things in the random sample. We're going to keep doing this until we've solved the problem. There's lots of different ways that we can go into that. And in fact, there's probably a whole nother training course that we could do on quality assurance surveillance. So we'll take that under advisement. But yeah, so good questions here. There's another one here from Kristen, but we're gonna keep going with the presentation, and hopefully we have a little bit of time in the next 20 minutes to get back to that. So Kelly, let's keep going with the next slide. All right, so I think we've talked a little bit about this. The only thing we haven't talked a ton about is establishing incentives. So here's what I'm going to say about incentives. We could do a whole nother webinar on that as well. But I will say this quite simply. My soapbox moment for all of you is this. Performance incentives, incentive type contracts, all of those things are icing on the cake. If you really want to incentivize higher levels of performance, the absolute best way to do that is with better written requirements and performance standards, and making sure that it's transparent what you expect, what you want and what you expect. Because when a vendor understands what your expectations are, then they know how to show up and meet that level of acceptability, which also means that they know how to show up and exceed that level of acceptability. So you've already given them the baseline by writing clear, transparent requirements and standards. You've given them the baseline to understand how to show up and meet your acceptable performance. You've also given them the baseline to exceed it. Now, then the question becomes, okay, well, now they know how to exceed it, but why would they unless there's an incentive for them to exceed it? Fair point, right? So if they understand how to meet the government's expectations of quality or how to exceed it, then why would they exceed it unless there's an incentive? It's a fair point. I don't know. I think in general, probably industry is going to show up and meet your level of acceptability 9 times out of 10. But there's always a chance that they're like, hey, I really want to impress the government. I really want to show them that I was worth the investment. I was worth the contract. And in fact, I really want them to consider me for next time. I'm going to go a little bit above and beyond. And chances are that's going to result in a higher past performance evaluation in our contractor performance assessment reporting system, CPARS, where we assess how well they performed. If they exceed our standards, we're going to give them a higher rating. And if you establish that baseline for acceptable, then you also understand what a 3 means in the context of those CPARS evaluations. Okay, so if you choose to put some sort of monetary or time-based incentive and attach it to either specific performance requirements or to the contract as a whole, you can do that as icing on the cake. But you really absolutely need to make sure you have a solid set of requirements, a solid set of standards, clear, acceptable quality levels, and you have a good plan in place for how you're going to monitor performance with your QASP. And then those additional incentives could help drive better performance. But it's no guarantee, because I tell you, as soon as you put monetary or time-based incentives, your vendor's going to start chasing them. Okay? And that could affect other things if you haven't thought through your strategy well. Next slide. All right, so as Kelly showed earlier, you've got this ARC spreadsheet. You can download it from gsa.gov/seesaw. Look for the ARC or the requirements roadmap worksheet, or ARC spreadsheet, I think it's called. Once you've done the first half of the spreadsheet where you've built up your requirement statement, then you can work on the second half, which is your standard, your AQL, your what you're going to inspect, how frequently you're going to inspect it, who's doing the inspection, and then where necessary, also including some information about how you're going to calculate the standard and AQL. And I'm not going to go into depth on that today just for time, but we could talk about that another time if people have questions about that. Next slide. All right, so we've covered the 5 key elements. All right, we talked about understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. We talked about framing the scope, right? Identifying those big buckets of work. Then underneath each of those buckets of work, defining the specific deliverables, the results, the outcomes of the deliverables, right? That's the 3rd key. The 4th key was turning those little deliverables, results, outcomes into actual ARC statements, action, result, context statements. Kelly walked us through that. And then the 5th piece was to have performance standards for each of those requirements. But folks, there's something that guides the entire process of everything that we're doing, and it's so important. I mentioned transparency and clarity earlier. Kelly, talk to us about this next section. What are we getting into here?
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Plain language. What we're talking about is something that the average Joe can understand. I once had a chemistry teacher tell me, he's like, well, tell it to me in country. What he wanted me to do was explain it to him using plain language, and that would show him that I understood what we were teaching. Then there's ambiguous writing. How many of you have read a giant paragraph of a performance work statement, and at the end of that paragraph, you're going, but what do they want? I've been there. We want to make sure that we're not using vague sentences. We want to make sure that we understand how it's going to be measured. And of course, we want to avoid language that sounds like personal services. So that's a big one, especially when you're doing professional services. And of course, minimize the use of qualifying phrases. Common causes, it can be a misplaced modifier or ambiguous pronouns, words with multiple meanings, like the word bank can mean several different things depending on your context. And then, of course, we're going to talk about your PWS. No big paragraphs. We're going to say not a zip zilch on that. We want short sentences. Bullet it. You can put, if you look on the right-hand side, 4.1 on, you can do your action result context. But if you needed to add some more clarification or other items, you can use it as a bullet point. So that way it is very clear for the contractor to read your performance work statement. You can put in your performance requirement summary. That is straight from, as you just got through seeing, from the spreadsheet that we use. Make sure that you use bold and italics as needed. We want you to look at it and have a PWS that is very, very easy to read. That is the whole idea of this. We want the contractor to know what we're trying to do. But of course, there are some common pitfalls. The vague standards. I think that's the hardest one. I worked with an environmental group, and I was trying to get their performance work statement, and I couldn't understand what they want, and I'm an environmental person. So I looked at them and I said, okay, give me your Spice Girls. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. We want to know what it is they actually need. And once we find that, it's very easy to fix the vagueness. And of course, unrealistic expectations. 100% compliance on everything You're going to wear out your core. You're going to wear out your PM. That's a little too high. And of course, we're all human. Everybody makes mistakes. We just want to make sure they're manageable. And of course, do not turn a PWS into a statement of work. And when I say that, it also means nix the labor categories within your PWS. You want to tell them what the work is, not how to perform it, or also not telling them what kind of person they need to perform it. Okay, Jonathan, give us a nice quick review. I know we're a little over time, but I'm hoping everybody is getting a lot of information out of this.
Well, I'm so glad that we scheduled this one for an hour and a half today, so we could really delve into this content because it's a lot, okay? And we recognize that. It's one of the reasons why, even though performance-based acquisition has been around since the early 2000s, we're still struggling with it. It's not easy to do. In fact, honestly, when we talk about the pros and cons of doing a statement of work versus a performance work statement, at the end of the day, the only con to doing a performance work statement and really focusing on results and outcomes is the upfront effort of working collaboratively with a team to write the darn thing. But once you get it, then you can tweak it as you go and refine it and polish it, and it gets better over time. You just have to put in a little elbow grease up front. All right, so we talked about the 5 keys. We talked about the foundational building blocks of vision and mission statement and high-level objectives. Then we talked about the more technical, contractor shall statements and how to arrive at those, and the importance of every requirement statement being interlocked with a performance standard, and especially focusing on writing standards for quality. It's so important, and it's just part and parcel of what we do. This last bit that Kelly was just talking about here, it boils down to one really simple thing. You should be writing your contract for the vendor you've never worked with before. Plain language basically means that somebody else can pick this up and understand what you're talking about. And if you need a quick reality check on that, give this to a new contract specialist in your office, if you have any, and have them read it and say, does this make sense? And if they can articulate back to you what it is that you're trying to buy, you've probably done a pretty good job. But if they're lost in technical jargon and they're really not sure what it is you're talking about, well, then you probably have a little bit more work to do. So plain language, writing this for the vendor you've never worked with before, it's a really critical facet to the whole process. But yeah, take the time to work with folks to write better requirements. And at the end of the day, I'll say this, recognizing that it is not easy to do this work, we do have some resources for you in our Center of Excellence for Outcome-Based Contracting. The Center of Excellence, some of you may have heard of the Seesaw program, CSAW. The Seesaw is a facilitated workshop where we bring acquisition teams together, especially for larger, more complex acquisitions for services. And we help those teams to go through these steps and build them out. And as you saw that picture of the U.S. Marshal Service, we guide them through the process. They're contributing all of the content. We are just helping provide the structure to make it happen. In addition to that, our center also provides specialized facilitation as a service. So if your team is struggling to figure out your acquisition strategy, maybe you've been asked to pivot from time and material labor hour to firm fixed price, and you're really hung up on how to do that because you don't want to destroy your operations by screwing everything up, and you just need some facilitation to help navigate that, we can probably provide some sort of facilitated session where we bring everybody together and we look at brainstorming solutions and how to effectively pivot to a new strategy. And also we provide performance work statement reviews and coaching. So we can take a look at your requirements document, go through the requirements, mark it up with some suggestions on how to strengthen the language. So there's a lot of things that we can do because our goal as a center is to help you get better outcomes from your services contracts. Additionally, as you're seeing today, we're here to help educate the workforce. So we're continuously providing trainings like this. If you like this office hours today, if you think that GSA should do more office hours like this and provide trainings like this, let them know. All right, let them know that you like this, you like the content. Let them know what you want to learn more about, and we will respond in kind. We've shared with you gsa.gov/seesaw, where you can find some additional resources that we've posted that can help you do some of your own facilitation internally. But we also have a great resource, and Kelly, maybe you can help by putting this into chat. If you go to buy.gsa.gov/SPBA, which is short for Steps to Performance-Based Acquisition, we have a web-based playbook for performance-based acquisition that does some really deep dives into the 8 steps of performance-based acquisition that can help you on your journey even more. I'll tell you right now, for services acquisition, we talked a little bit about the FAR overhaul earlier in the session today. When you read the FAR companion and then you read the category management guide, so those two things are new resources that are supposed to go along with the FAR rewrite. In the category management guide for services acquisition, it mentions doing a seesaw or using the tool Steps to Performance-Based Acquisition to help you navigate your services acquisition buy. So check out those tools. They're really helpful. And stay tuned for more, hopefully later this year, on our AI tool that we're prototyping and piloting right now. It could be a great kind of in between, right? It won't do all the work for you, but it'll provide some good coaching and feedback on how to strengthen your requirements that you can use on demand. So hopefully we're going to be able to launch that later this year or early next year. But there's a whole lot of stuff in the AI space, as I'm sure you can imagine, that has not fully sorted itself out yet. So we're still working on figuring all that out. But yeah, Alyssa, thanks so much for inviting Kelly and I to come today and sharing with folks how to write better requirements.
Thank you so much, Jonathan and Kelly. This was a very informative presentation, as everyone in the chat has shared. And I just want to thank everybody else for taking part in our office hours, professional services, and human capital categories office hours. We do also have another upcoming office hours next month on March 12th, and it'll be about FAR overhaul updates, implications for mass ordering, and customer program execution. And we hope to see you on that one. But again, for those who attended this webinar today, you will receive 1.5 CLPs for coming, and you'll receive it in about 10 business days. So don't you worry. And please fill out the feedback form after this Zoom call ends. And we thank you all very much, and we'll see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.